Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, May 31st, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Texas Democratic Party and their effort last night to prevent the GOP from passing a sweeping bill, pretty much a voter suppression law, as many media sources put it, largely due to its very different level of restrictions, something that we haven't really seen until after the 2020 election. And before we get into this video, I do want to say that the reason why my voice may sound a little bit softer and you're going to have to turn your volume up, I know for me personally, it's going to require my volume to be 80 to 100%. I do apologize for that. That's because I am currently away from home, so I'm going to be recording in a hotel room, and there's a lot of outside noises. I'm right by the beach, which means that you can hear seagulls sometimes, which is unfortunate, but just the reality of it, that, you know, I'm not in a situation where I can record in a closed off space, and I'm with a couple of my friends in this room, so it's just a pretty difficult predicament in order to record videos, but I'll be back on the 5th and things will be back to normal then. So what happened last night? What was the GOP trying to do in the state of Texas, and how did the Democratic Party ultimately prevent it from happening, at least momentarily? Well, the Texas Democratic Party walked out of the state house. Quite literally, there was, the Texas legislature was voting on legislation, and it allowed the Democratic Party to be in a position where if they were not there, if they were completely absent, there would not be enough members present in order to vote on this bill. Now, this was an effort that was made by the Democratic Party in order as a last-ditch effort. This was not their primary reason to prevent, this is not their primary, at least initial way of preventing this GOP voting bill from actually passing. Of course, that would go through the actual voting process and through debate and through deliberation, but the GOP, at least based off the eyes of the Democratic Party, was not going to go through with that. So the Texas Democrats sent out a mass text message to all of their members and said, leave the building. Quite literally, get up and go. Because if we aren't here, they can't vote on this bill. And they were right. So we found out that last night that this bill was going to die due to the session ending, and the bill was unable to pass just due to the fact that there were not enough Democratic members present, or not enough members in whole present in order for this bill to pass. And this GOP voting bill was actually a very restrictive one. It was one that was quite interesting to see. And obviously, there are ways for the GOP to get around this, but this was a momentary win for Democrats that might last a little bit longer or a little bit shorter than expected. So what was this bill going to do? Well, it says right here, the final bill, known as SB 7, included new restrictions on absentee voting, granted broad new autonomy and authority to partisan poll watchers, escalated punishments for mistakes or offenses by election officials, and banned both drive-through voting and 24-hour voting, which were used for the first time during the 2020 election in Harris County. Now, before we get into, all of this and why it's all negative, I would say, because it does make it more and more harder to vote, which obviously, if you're watching my channel, you probably don't want less people voting, because that completely goes away and is completely un-American. But if you're looking at Harris County, there's a very big reason as to why you're seeing this happen. Harris County is home to, 2 million plus residents, where we saw over 1.5 million votes cast in the 2020 election. Joe Biden won this county 56 to 42.7. This victory for Joe Biden was an instrumental reason as to why he was at 46.5% on in the Texas statewide vote. And if you're looking at surrounding counties besides Harris, not surrounding, but other counties, you have Fort Worth, in Tarrant County, you have Dallas. In Dallas County, you have Austin. In Travis County, you have San Antonio. In Bexar County, you have population centers and regions of the state of Texas that have large populations that likely would have enacted certain of these, 24-hour voting or drive-through voting or ballot drop boxes, whatever the effort is, just to ensure that people could vote, especially during the 2020 election, then more than ever, due to the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic and the vaccines hadn't been distributed to the general public until months after the 2020 election. And this final bill was quite interesting to see. I mean, looking at what the Texas Republican Party wanted to do, it would be very difficult and very dangerous for some of these election officials to make some pretty trivial mistakes. I mean, if you're looking at this alone, it sounds like it's something that would secure election security, at least at face value, but there's no reason or justification as to why we should ban drive-through voting. There's no evidence, there hasn't been any evidence of the 2020 election being rigged, but there's no evidence that drive-through voting increases voter fraud, that 24-hour voting increases voter fraud. This is a clear target by the Texas Republican Party to prevent Democrats from winning future elections. And I know what you might be thinking. Texas is Texas. Why would the GOP ever be worried about the state of Texas? We'll look at the 2020 election results, and I'll show you some of the other states that are typically deemed swing states by the GOP, but they have been so unwilling to admit that Texas is a swing state. Donald Trump won the state of Texas by 5.6%, and that seems like it would be a lot. But when you compare it to other states, it absolutely isn't. Virginia went to Joe Biden by 10.1%, nearly double what Texas went by. Minnesota went by 7% to Joe Biden, 2 points more than Texas did for Donald Trump. Same story in the state of New Hampshire, a 7.3% victory for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, a 5.6% victory for Donald Trump over Joe Biden in Texas. If you're looking at New Mexico, a 10-point victory for Biden compared to 6. Colorado, a 14-point victory for Biden compared to 6. Even Michigan was comparable to the state of Texas with a 2.8% margin of victory to 5.6%. Obviously, it's off by around 3 points, but it's closer there than Texas is to Colorado, New Mexico, or Virginia, which I think is just quite interesting to see, considering the fact that some of these states have always been swing states, at least in the 21st century, whereas Texas really hasn't until now. So the GOP is in a position where if they are to suppress the vote among some of these Democratic counties, Tarrant County, Dallas County, you have, Bexar County, you're looking at Harris County, it will work. Because the GOP seems very much afraid. And it wasn't just the 2020 election that really tipped them off as to what might happen in the state of Texas in the future. So looking at the Texas election results, if you look at 2018, which I don't have up currently, but if you look at 2018, Beto O'Rourke came within 3 points of winning a Senate race. 3 points in 2018. So 2 years later, Donald Trump expanded on the margin, but the point is the Democrats did very well in the state of Texas, a state that was otherwise deemed unwinnable by the Democratic Party. Alongside, in 2018, the House of Representatives in Texas saw a net gain of 12 for Democrats. That was in districts across the state that ultimately elected more Democrats, mainly in areas that were metropolitan areas, areas with larger cities that had surrounding suburbs, and that's what benefited the Democrats here. They gained 11% in the total voting compared to 2016 and gained 12 seats. They came within 6 points of winning the popular vote in the House of Representatives elections. And then you fast forward to 2020, while nothing was gained or lost by the Democrats, they kept it even. So 2016, presidential electoral election where Donald Trump won the state of Texas by 9 points, the Democrats still picked up 5 seats. Fast forward to 2018, they pick up 12, and then in 2020, they keep it even, but they have opportunities in the future. And just looking not only in the House of Representatives, but also the Texas Senate election results, you might also find some equally interesting results. The Democrats are within 3 seats of winning the majority in the Texas State Senate. If you look at 2018, if you look at the overall difference here between 2020, 2018, and the year prior, I mean, you're talking about a jump of, what is that, 4 or 3 seats from 2016. And, it is just quite interesting to see how much the statewide vote has changed. If you're looking at 2016, Republicans won the popular vote by 18 points in the state Senate races. 2018, you didn't see nearly the same result. You saw a victory of just 6 points. Fast forward to 2020, Republicans get a little bit larger of a victory, but they don't win by 18 points. Instead, they win by 9. And Democrats even gained 1 seat, despite the Republicans expanding their margin of victory across the state in terms of statewide vote. So Democrats went from being down at 10 seats all the way up to 13 by the end of 2020, and they can continue this trend into 2022 and beyond. And Greg Abbott is very angry about this, saying that he's going to target legislator pay, essentially saying that the state legislatures shouldn't be funded if they can't pass bills. He also says that he's going to include this in the next special session. Essentially, he can call the legislature to meet and convene and to vote on certain bills and to start a brand new session, which means that this voting bill would technically have to be rewritten, but the language and the content is already there. What the GOP wants to target is already here in Texas and across the United States. Georgia passed that voting law back in March of 2021, and it was the first of over 100. FiveThirtyEight did a pretty in-depth analysis of some of these voting laws that have been sent out in some of these states at the state legislature level that are, sweeping across the nation, making it increasingly more difficult to vote for the average American, and it just all disenfranchises certain demographic groups. And you know exactly which demographic groups based on the fact that many of these bills being passed and sent out are by the GOP. So I find that part to be quite interesting, because if you're looking at the reason why they would ban 24-hour voting or drive-through voting, this is typically in larger counties. Well, in larger counties, Democrats tend to do better. The situation is that there wouldn't be a need for 24-hour voting in a rural county in the middle of northern Texas, but maybe in Houston there would be, because of the fact that there is 20 to 25 times the population of another county, maybe just 100 miles away. It's just quite interesting to see why the Texas Republicans are targeting it, but it seems to be a consistency across all of the Republican parties across the states. You know, looking at Georgia, looking at Texas, looking at Arizona, looking at Michigan, all of these bills potentially being passed or being voted on that could be passing in the immediate future, all disenfranchise mainly Democratic voters, urban voters, lower income voters, and minority voters. And there's an exact reason why. If you're looking at that exit polling data, the GOP realizes rather than try to win over some of these voters, it's easier to have them not vote at all. If you're in a situation where you're working 2 jobs and you're voting because it is your American right, but you don't have the time to wait in line for 6 hours. You could have voted by drive-thru, but that's now banned. You could have voted at maybe 12 a.m. by the time you had gotten off, or 11 p.m., but that's now banned in Harris County. So you're in a position where you don't have time to vote. So you're just going to think, it's just 1 vote. What is that going to do to the election? Well, when you had that repeated tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times across the United States, not only here in Texas, that's when you start to see voter disenfranchisement. And that's exactly what's happening. That's what's happening here in Georgia and already passed. That's what the GOP tried to pass last night in the state of Texas. This is very clear that it's voter suppression, and it makes it more difficult for people to vote because, honestly speaking, the GOP is horrified. They are so afraid of the Democratic Party in the state of Texas. Keep your eye on the state as the elections go on. They started the century with a 21-point victory, going into 2004 with a 23-point victory, even when Barack Obama had a landslide at a 12-point victory, and then Mitt Romney with a 16-point victory. But fast forward to 2020, that 16-point victory quickly turned into a 5.6% victory, a difference of over 10 percentage points. Can you imagine, if you're talking about the 2028 election? What's to say that the trend doesn't continue and Democrats don't win the state by 4 points in 2028? Potentially could win the state by 1 point in 2024. The GOP is so worried about the Democratic Party. They are mortified at the idea of Democrats winning the state because it's not just the presidential election, which would be a very good result for Democrats if they were able to win the state of Texas. If I show you the 2016 election results, let's say, for instance, that all the states stay the same and Hillary Clinton changes 1 state. Well, she would be very eager to change the state of Texas because it would give her the election victory. That means even with Donald Trump winning the swing states of Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio, you're talking about 10 states here that would be flipped, or, 10 states or 9 states that would be remaining with the GOP. 9 swing states. But because of that one being Texas, the Democrats win. This is why they are worried. Because once Texas makes that jump from red to blue, they probably won't be able to win unless they dominate in the Rust Belt. And like I had said, it's not just the presidential level. It's also the Senate level. It's also the governor elections. When you see Texas have 2 Democratic senators in a very similar fashion to the way that Arizona and Georgia do, this is the future that the Republican Party in Texas is trying to prevent. They are doing this in the name and under the guise of election security, but there is no election security coming as a result of banning 24-hour voting. There is no election security coming as a result of banning drive-through voting. There is no election security coming out of result of many of these things that the GOP is passing, but because of optics and the way that they have been able to speak to their base, it seems like it is, at least to them. And Greg Abbott, someone who is now trying to punish the legislature for walking out of the State House and not voting on this during their session, is running for governor in 2022. Looking at Beto O'Rourke, who might actually run for governor, he also might be afraid of Beto O'Rourke defeating him. Now, I don't think Beto O'Rourke would defeat Greg Abbott, but he definitely seems to be in a position where he wants to have a 2018-style victory. He won against Luke Valdez in 2018 by double digits. In 2014, Greg Abbott also won the state of Texas by double digits against Wendy Davis, and that was an election that the Democratic Party really felt was personal to them. Yet Greg Abbott won by 20 points. Just looking at the governor election in 2014, Greg Abbott won the state. if you're looking at 2018, despite it being a year where Ted Cruz almost lost this Senate race, Greg Abbott ran for governor. And then in 2022, he's running for a third term, and he has already announced that he's running. And amongst the Democratic Party, the only top candidate seems to be Beto O'Rourke. So Beto O'Rourke was that one candidate in 2018 that had a stellar performance, and Greg Abbott might be in a position where he doesn't want that to happen. He doesn't want the first Democratic victory to be his governor's race, which is why he seems to be so personally invested in this voting bill. Not only is he a Republican, but he's a vulnerable one at that, at least based off of surface value election history. Texas probably will be re-electing Greg Abbott, probably by a pretty considerable amount, but he's not going to win by 20 points like he did in 2014. He probably won't win by 12, 13 points like he did in 2018. After the infrastructure debacle and a lot of the attacks on Greg Abbott, it's going to be very difficult for him to win a lot of those Democratic voters as he did in 2018. But only time will tell for that point. So the GOP seems to be targeting states around the country. Texas is probably one of the first few stops for the GOP, but it's going to continue and continue and continue. But right now, the Democrats have a momentary victory in the state legislature, all through the fact that the legislature failed to meet a quorum. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.